I need a new computer, and I love that new Mac Pro that costs $6,000. It's awfully pretty, but I'd rather spend my money somewhere else. So I've taken upon myself to see if I can build a computer for significantly less money that matches the power. I spent $1,563 on these parts, plus $100 for the operating system. I'm going to walk you through how I chose each part and give you some options where you can spend more or less depending on what you need. Show you a quick stop action of me building the computer, and then I'm going to run through some tests. After I run through the tests, I will have a conclusion as to whether I wasted my money or I did a good thing. Check it out. It all starts with the choice of CPU. I didn't consider the AMD CPUs because one of my primary concerns is Pro Tools, and Pro Tools is not tested or authorized to use on an AMD CPU. It might work fine, but I didn't want to take any chances. I've chosen an i9-9900K, which compares pretty favorably to the Xenon chip in the Mac Pro. I could not find a head-to-head comparison online, but in general, from what I could see, frequently the 9900K will outperform the Xenon. Both chips are 8 cores, 16 threads. The 9900K runs at 3.6 gigahertz with a max turbo boost to 5 gigahertz. The Xenon runs at 3.5 gigahertz with a max turbo boost to 4 gigahertz. The i9 is rated at 95 watts and the Xenon is rated at 150 watts. Clock speed, cores, threads, that's all important. But one spec that a lot of people overlook when buying a CPU is watts. Watts is the amount of power that the CPU can dissipate. Each chip will come in different wattages. Even i9-9900s come in 25 watts, 95 watts, 125 watts. I've chosen the i9-9900K, and K is what's important because that means this chip is rated for 95 watts. A lower wattage chip will slow down the CPU if it starts to get hot, which is why the wattage rating is important. The Xenon chip used in the Mac Pro is a server-grade chip, and on a day-to-day basis, I don't think you're going to see much advantage in using that, even though it's much more expensive. It does have 64 PCI lanes as opposed to 16 on the i9. Now, those additional PCI lanes are probably where the Mac Pro has the big advantage. If you start filling up the PCI card slots using a lot of Thunderbolt connections or other peripherals, that's probably where the Mac Pro shines. If you're running a single video card and local hard drives, I don't think that the Mac Pro would have a big advantage in that scenario. The Xenon chip in the Mac Pro also does use ECC error-correcting memory, but I've never owned a computer that used error-corrected memory. It's generally used in servers. If you've owned a Mac that has an i7 or an i5 or an i3, you haven't had ECC either, so I don't really see it as a factor in the decision. So what are the disadvantages of the i9 chip that I've chosen? The first one is this. It's a 9th generation chip, and Intel has since released the 10th generation. The 10th generation chips use a different socket, so you would need a different motherboard if you ever want to upgrade this chip. But I really think it's going to last for a lot of years. I didn't go with the 10th generation chip because I didn't see a major performance boost, but I saw a very large price increase. If Pro Tools is the major reason you're building this computer, you might save a little bit of money by buying the 9th generation i7 instead of the i9. Avid recommends that you shut off hyperthreading, which means in this case, instead of running my i9 at 8 cores, 16 threads, I would run it at 8 cores, 8 threads, which is the same basically as the i7, which doesn't have hyperthreading, so it's always running at 8 cores, 8 threads. I'm going to run tests in both configurations, but I don't expect that there will be much of a difference. If you want to double check any of the technical stuff I'm saying in this video, I really highly recommend you check out the Gamers Nexus channel on YouTube. They take deep dives and heavy analysis from computer fans to CPUs to cases to RAM, and it's a great source of information. I'll drop a link to their channel below this video. Because prices are constantly fluctuating, I didn't put the prices in the video. But beneath the video, there's links to buy this stuff, and you can go take a look and see what the current price is. Motherboard. The motherboard I chose is the Asus Z390 Prime A. One of the big advantages of building your own computer over a store-bought computer is you have control of the hardware on the motherboard in the BIOS settings of the computer. Unfortunately, to make computers foolproof, most manufacturers have removed important settings from the motherboard when you buy a store-bought computer. So you can't control certain things. Things that Avid recommends. Avid recommends you turn off Turbo Boost. They recommend you turn off hyperthreading. They recommend you turn off C-states, which you can't do in most store-bought computers. This motherboard is a decent mid-price motherboard. It often comes bundled with the i9-9900K, so you can get a deal on it. There's really nothing special about it. It will take 2 M.2 drives. It will take 6 SATA drives. It's got plenty of USB 3.1, 3.0, and 2.0 ports. It's Thunderbolt compatible, so if I choose to, I can add a Thunderbolt card. It can handle 64 gigabytes of RAM memory. The Mac Pro can handle 768 gigabytes, but I don't think I need that. It has a single gigabit Ethernet port. The Mac Pro has 2 10 gigabit Ethernet ports, but really the only purpose I can see for that is if you're video editing on a RAID-to-RAID, and I'm not doing that. And if I ever decide I need that, for $120, I could buy a dual 10 gigabit Ethernet port card. This motherboard also doesn't have built-in Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, which is a little disappointing. If you want to, you could spend a few bucks more and buy a better motherboard that would have possibly faster Ethernet, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi. Video card GPU. This is something I'm pretty excited about. The Nvidia Rtx 2060 KO with a big emphasis on KO. 2060 is a good mid-range video card, but the KO version actually uses the same die or chip as the 2070 or the 2080. It's been cut down, so it functions basically the same as the 2060. But the KO variant, for some reason, performs significantly better when doing renders in Blender or other graphics-intensive programs. But even a stock 2060 is significantly faster than the 580X Pro that's in the Mac Pro. This is one of the reasons that I believe that this computer build is going to equal or beat the base model Mac Pro. Now, if you want to save a few bucks by buying the same video card that's in the Mac Pro, the AMD Radeon Pro 580X. Now, I don't see the Pro version of the 580X on sale anywhere, so you could buy the straight 580. And the only significant difference between the 580X and the Pro 580X is a slightly higher clock speed. RAM. I've had really good luck with Crucial hard drives and Crucial memory, so I bought Crucial DDR4 3200 megahertz speed RAM. I'm not overclocking the i9, so it actually runs at 2666 megahertz, which is the same speed and the same amount of RAM that comes in the Mac Pro. System boot drive. Crucial P5 M.2 solid state drive. I've had good luck with Crucial solid state drives. This is a 500 gigabyte M.2 solid state drive. It's twice the size of what you'd get in the Mac Pro. I like to keep my boot drive small so I can make a good disk image backup of it. I don't keep any files on it. I just keep the operating system and programs I'm running. So 500 gigabytes is perfect, and it's super fast. Cooling for the CPU. Cooling for the CPU is really important because if your processor gets too hot, it's going to throttle down and slow down your entire computer. There's 2 types of options for this. There's liquid cooled and air cooled. I went with air cooled just because I wanted a simple approach. There are many good liquid cooled options as well, but you've got to be a bit more careful with what you choose. So I chose the best air-cooled option. One thing to be careful of is this sucker's big, so you've got to be sure that it fits in your case. The 2 reasons I chose this air cooler are, first, it's very highly rated and it competes well with liquid cooling. The second reason I chose it is it's easy to mount and install. There were other air coolers I was interested in, Be Quiet and a couple other companies, but some of them, if you look at the reviews, they say they're a pain in the neck to actually get into place, and I was concerned about that, so I got the Noctua NH-D15. Very quiet and very efficient cooling. Power supply. There's a lot of good choices for power supplies. I chose the Be Quiet Power 11. Be Quiet's known for making quiet cases and quiet fans and quiet supplies. This one's 700 watts, which is plenty of power. You could get by with a little bit less if you want to save a few bucks, 600 or 650 watts. This also has separate wires that plug in for your drives and other peripherals, which keeps the wiring in the case neat. The computer case. Now, this is one decision I'm not so sure about. There's two approaches to computer cases these days. There's the quiet case, which is pretty well sealed up, and then there's the new approach, which is the sort of open air case. And the philosophy behind the open air case is because it allows more airflow, it actually runs cooler and your fans run slower and it keeps your computer quieter. I bought the Be Quiet 500DX, which is one of the more modern mesh cases. It is very quiet under a high load. But that said, when the computer is not running at a high load, I can barely hear the fans. I can just slightly perceive them. So I kind of wish I'd gone with my first choice, which was the Fractal Design R6 USB-C. Problem I had was they're back ordered and the price keeps going up. There are other good cases on the market. I'm not sure this was the best choice. It's a really good case. My computer runs really cool and really quiet, but I can just barely hear it, and being an audio engineer kind of drives me nuts. The first step in building a computer is to mount the CPU and the motherboard. And while I had the motherboard outside of the case, I also mounted the brackets for the CPU cooler. I've always worked on computers, but this is the first computer that I built from scratch. The only part I was a little nervous about was putting the CPU in, but that actually went pretty smoothly. I just followed the instructions. Then I mounted the motherboard into the case. A little bit of cursing going on here. One of the Be Quiet fans was in the way, so I took it out to get the motherboard in smoothly. Next, I mounted the power supply, slid in very easily, screwed it in, then bring the wires around and thread them through the case. I'm just checking the manual here to see where the cables connect from the power supply. I'm probably connecting the audio cables and the USB cables as well. Installing the M.2 drive and the RAM, which is very straightforward. Installing the CPU cooler and adjusting the fan slightly so they clear the RAM, and I'm doing this before I put the video card in so I have some clearance. Last step, pop in the video card and boot it up. It worked. As luck would have it, I got an email from a friend that needed a mix for BMG done on a tight schedule. It was 128 tracks, so I was in a slight dilemma of do I try to mix on this new machine where I could expect problems, or go to the older one where 128 tracks would be a bit of a burden. And I took a risk and I used the new machine and it worked flawlessly. I'm going to open up this session on the new Mac Pro as well and see how it compares with CPU usage and how Pro Tools indicates the system usage. I didn't want to mess up the test by using screen capture software. So when I'm filming the system usage on my computer and on the Mac Pro, I'm using a cell phone to do it. I did go back and run some further tests running OBS so you could see what's going on, but I wanted to keep it apples to apples. So I didn't want other software to be running while Pro Tools was running. So running this 128 track session with multiple auxiliaries and I think about 90 plugins, what I see is Pro Tools usage is running in the 30 to low 40s range. If I look at Task Manager for the overall CPU usage, it's averaging about 15%. That's all, 15%. Now let's head over to Garden Sound Studios in Hoboken, New Jersey, where my friend Ryan Kelly is going to check this on the new Mac Pro. Pretty cool studio. If you're interested, take a look. There will be a link down below. We are at Garden Sound Studio in Hoboken, New Jersey. Great little place, amazing gear, fantastic engineer, Ryan Kelly. And they have just installed a new Mac Pro. So Ryan, this is a pretty cool studio.
Why, thank you, Brad.
How long have you been here?
In this current form, it's been open for about 2 years. So we've got the Neotech Series 1E here, and then live rooms out there yonder. Do a lot of rock, and we've got a collection of most of the guitar amps you could want here, and all of the microphones we could pull in. So outboards there behind me, and pretty much we designed it to be really configurable and adjustable to whatever comes in.
Amazing amp collection. So we're going to try to open this session that I was mixing at home on the new PC and see how it goes. Garden Sound Studios does have an HDX system, but we switched the playback engine to aggregate audio to disable the HDX. 28 to 40%. And that's about what I got on the PC. It's very, very similar. Wait a minute. Do you see what's wrong with this picture? Okay, so on the PC that I built, I was running about 15% CPU, and in Pro Tools it indicated 30 to the low 40%. On the Mac Pro, what we're seeing is 9% CPU and slightly lower, 28 to the low 40s. So it's very, very close. Now, at first I attributed this difference to the fact that possibly it was the operating system. But if you look at this, I asked Ryan for the system configuration. I'm actually comparing my 8-core to the $7,000 12-core Mac Pro. So that's pretty good. I'm happy. This test shows that plugins and Pro Tools are actually getting more graphics intensive. Opening up this spectrum analyzer, you see a definite increase in GPU and CPU usage. In this clip, I've imported a 1080p DNxHD video into my 128-track session. The system is still running with plenty of overhead, only going about 20% on the CPU. In this test, AutoCAD Fusion is running completely smooth with a project I'm working on that has about 120 components in it. Same thing for DaVinci Resolve. Everything is effortless and smooth, though if you're editing 4K video or if you're doing heavy color grading, you're going to want a better video card than the 2060 KO. Now, this is crazy. I found on Pro Tools Expert that there was a benchmark that they use that you can download, and they were comparing the Mac Pros to the new M1 Macs. Now, this is not a fair test for the M1. It's running Pro Tools under Rosetta, not using Pro Tools that's coded specifically for the M1. So it does an incredible job as is, but I expect the performance to increase once the code is rewritten for this chip. The M1 is limited to 16 gigabytes of RAM. I frequently load projects that maybe have 6-8 gigabytes of audio files. So this test is kind of strange in that it uses small audio files. We don't really know how Pro Tools is going to perform on the M1. We're going to have to wait for some real-world usage using the new coded software. So this computer easily beats the M1. That's not the point. But I use the same test that they use on a 12-core Mac Pro, the new version, and I'm running 128 tracks of audio, 128 deverbs, 128 channel strips, 512 tracks of instruments with the boom drum instrument, and 25 11 plugins. When running 512 MIDI tracks on the Mac Pro, they were only able to get 10 11 plugins. Now, I'm using 11 Lite, which they say you can use in this test. I don't know if that's any different as far as CPU load, but easily this computer matched, if not beat, the 12-core Mac Pro. You can see I'm at 70%. They say load it up until you start getting errors. I never got an AAX plugin error. I never got a spike in Pro Tools. It always sat around 70% with 512 of the instrument tracks and 128 audio tracks. I sort of gave up at that point. I didn't add any more plugins because, as you can see, the screen refresh was getting a little slow, but it never errored and it never peaked. Pretty incredible. So I'm happy. I'm surprised. Came out much better than I thought. From what I can see, it's as powerful as a 12-core Mac Pro. Probably, maybe not a 12-core, but definitely the 8-core. And it's much more powerful than the new M1s. That said, there's a couple things to keep an eye out for. If you're going to load down the PCI bus, if you're using multiple video cards, if you're doing 4K editing over a RAID array on that 10 gigabit Ethernet port, you might start to run into issues that you wouldn't run into on the Mac Pro. And even if, by the way, if you're editing video, the video card I chose probably is not sufficient to be happy working with 4K video, or if you do heavy color grading or heavy effects, you would want a better video card. That said, I think it's phenomenal. It worked great on Fusion. It worked great on Resolve. It worked great on Pro Tools. One thing you should be aware of in Pro Tools, though, there's a few things actually. One is the shortcut keys are different between a Mac and a PC, and that can be annoying. If you can get yourself to Command Focus keys, I believe, are the same between Pro Tools on a Windows machine and Pro Tools on a Mac machine. A second difference is Dolby Atmos Production Suite is not made for the PC. I don't know if they ever will. I don't have Atmos speakers at my home mixing situation anyway, so it's not an issue. And from what I've seen of mixing Atmos, what I would most likely do is, if I was mixing a song, I'd mix it in 5.1. And then I would take it to an Atmos facility and then break out the elements that I wanted to fly around the room and take them out of the 5.1 bed. The third thing that's different between a Windows PC and a Mac PC running Pro Tools is Avid's come out with this new interface, this new Carbon, and it uses AVB over Ethernet. Now, some Macs already have AVB over Ethernet built into them, but it's not in Windows. And because it's tied to the hardware, I'm a little skeptical they'll ever get that to work. So those are a few things to keep an eye out for. But overall, I'm very happy. It's been flawless. If any glitches pop up, I will let you guys know. Again, I'm not a computer expert. I'm just an audio engineer that did a lot of research. So if you like this video, please click subscribe. Please click like. Leave comments below. If there's anything I missed, let me know. All right, till next time.